Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the holiday edition of Welcome to Greenville. My name is Andre. I am your host for this evening. For those of you joining us for the first time, and you're probably wondering what the heck is Welcome to Dreamville, well, let me share with you a little bit of inside information. My name, obviously, you just said, is Andre. I am a graphic novelist, and I'm working on the graphic novel adaptation of the biography Tom Petty. As you all know him as Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And it's called Welcome to Dreamville. And what it is it's the story about Tom growing up in Gainesville, Florida, which is also my hometown. And, what we're doing is working with the University of Florida Press to put out this book. And it's going to be the early days of Tom Petty before he met the Heartbreakers, before he became a Heartbreaker, but pretty much how he made his way up to music stardom. So very excited about that. I think it's going to be a good experience for everyone to check out. And, today what I'm really excited is to share with you a new guest on the Welcome to Dreamville podcast. Because every week what we do is we kind of share, some new people who are either musicians or authors or people who are really big fans of Tom Petty or new Tom Petty. But this week, we're going to have the exciting opportunity of talking with somebody on my neck of the woods within comic books and graphic novels. And I couldn't think of a better person to bring on this show than Chris Schweizer, who was one of my all-time favorite graphic novelists. Chris is joining us from, I believe, Kentucky. Is that right, Chris?
That's right, Andre. Thank you so much for having me out. I really appreciate it. And it's very good to see you.
Absolutely. Well, let's get this show started a little bit. A lot of people before I've had, Marty Gerard from the Motels on here. I've had Chris McKittrick, who wrote a biography about Tom Petty. You're not so much a Tom Petty person, but you're definitely no stranger to writing about history within the graphic novel form. So why don't you give us a little bit of the history of Chris Schweizer?
When I was about 25, up until that point, I was all over the place with what I wanted to do. I looked seriously into joining the infantry. I went through the discernment process to be an Episcopal priest. I had worked at a law firm for a couple of summers, thinking that I would be a lawyer. Working at the law firm cured me of that. I really had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. And, I assumed that you had to know by the time you were 25, and I didn't. And so I was fretting about that. And so my wife and I worked at we ran a hotel in Natchez, Mississippi, which from your ghost tour days, it was on the ghost tours of that city. And I spent a lot of time at the desk. I was, there, waiting for guests to check in, things along those lines. And I happened to stumble across some people making comics online and a message board that they frequented, which, I didn't know anything about it. I read a lot of, especially comic strips growing up. And I would pick up comics when I could find them that looked interesting, but I hadn't been much of a big two guy, like Marvel and DC from, early in high school. And I, offerings beyond that at this point were pretty slim. And so finding all these people making these comics was really exciting to me. And I started making my own and posting them on there. And it's folks who have since gone on to do like amazing things. So it's like Kazu Kibuishi and Raina Telgemeier and that whole crowd, Mike Mayhack. And basically all of Scholastic stable of, A-listers. And they were very encouraging to me when I was drawing stuff and posting stuff. I did my first comic that was like 6 pages long. It was the first thing that I had ever finished. I'd drawn plenty of the middle of comics before that. And then I drew a 12-pager, and then I drew a few more. And very quickly I realized that I absolutely loved this medium and that this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a cartoonist. And so within about 6 months or so, we had decided to stop working at the hotel. I would go to grad school. to learn how to do it properly as best I was able. And that was sort of the start of everything.
And that was quite a start, because from there on, you eventually published with Oni Press, the Krogan Adventures, correct?
Yeah, that first one I did actually while I was in grad school. That was my thesis, and I did that my second year. So it was a 2-year program, and the I was lucky enough to get a multi-book deal early on, and that was the sort of the start of those. And so these were my chance to do sort of the genre that I have the most affection for, which is historical fiction.
Now, the Krogan Adventures is kind of about a family and their family tree, and essentially all the different things and different timelines and generations that the Krogan family experienced. From pirates to colonial patriots to foreign legionnaires. Is your own family background so varied? Was there some, personal nature to this inspiration here?
I'm sure there's a factor to it. When I was a kid, we had our hallway was all family pictures, and some of them dating back 100 and plus years. And my dad could tell us about all of our different family members, and would tell us stories about some of the different ones. I've since gone and piggybacked one of my, and we have a lot of interesting folks through. One of my great aunts, who is the science fiction novelist Andre Norton, she had done a whole lot of genealogical research for my grandmom's side of the family, and so subsequent to her passing, another of my aunts gave me copies of all of her stuff, and so I used that to do further searching. And now it's easier than it has been. You don't have to travel to Steubenville, Ohio to look something up. You can just look on their own records online, or you can call them or something along those lines. And so we've been able to trace things back. We hit a really lucky vein where there, you find one good ancestry that links to a bunch of others. And so now I've got, it's on the other side of my computer. I grab it. But the giant sheet of, I don't know how to actually do genealogical annotation. So I just draw it really big with circles, like marriage dates and arrows pointing every which way. It's very, very much like Crazy Man with String aesthetic. But we've got it going back really, really far, which is really exciting. At first, we went back kind of far, and we were like, "Oh, that's really neat." And then we were looking through some like 19th century genealogical books, and we found something that said, and she was very, and such was very proud because she was the 9th generation illegitimate daughter of such and such. And we were like, "What?" And we didn't know that. And so then once we had that information, we were able to go from his kids forward and find where, she actually is. And so then that gave us a famous person. And once you find a famous person, you're sitting pretty on that. So I'll do drawings of some of our ancestors that I can find out information of and send them to my younger cousins and their kids, because it's kind of fun just to have that family lore in place.
And I noticed that through most of your work, you really don't really stick to one time period. I mean, really, you kind of bounce all over the place, and you have everything across not only the Krogan Adventures, but in every story, you kind of, there's no one particular time. We kind of play time traveler throughout. So, but personally, is there any time period that you prefer the most within your work?
Not necessarily. I'm most keen on doing something set in sort of the Herbert Asbury mid-19th century New York tribal slum area, just because I'm really fascinated by it, and that's my favorite. His The Gangs of New York and also Luc Sante's Low Life are two of my very favorite nonfiction history books, and so I'd love to do something set in that era, if only to help further cement that it should be its own literary genre akin to Westerns and mob stories. We've got, in America, we have Westerns and mob stories are kind of our two go-to historical fiction genres that to some degree are fairly removed from the actual fiction. They have their own internalized mythology, and I think that the Gangs of New York era has the potential to have its own internalized mythology, and I would love to see that exploited more narratively. And the big difference is, mob stories are our version of dynastic tragedies. Western stories are as a rule, tend to be about the triumph of the individual. The Asbury New York stories, I think, would tend to be about the triumph of unity. It's all of these stories are about these individual groups banding together for mutual survival in an incredibly dangerous and difficult time. And I think that were there to be a historical genre that reflected America with that, that might become more of an internalized part of our own national consciousness. And so I feel like I'm not going to be, a big hitter with that. But if enough people are doing those stories, eventually somebody's going to get really excited about it. And there's crazy costumes, and it's like it's such a mix of things. It's like a madcap shonen manga type of situation. The way that there are all these different groups with their eccentric costumes, and they're doing crazy stuff, and I love it. It's so bizarre, and it's something that feels so far removed from what we think of when we think of that era. But
you did an article a few years back about how getting graphic novel ideas up and off the ground, and how sometimes certain stories don't really pick up. And I think it might have been reference to something you were doing around that era.
Yeah, I pitched two stories in that historical genre, and neither one has gotten picked up. They're like, there's just not a market for this. And that's probably true. That would be the plus side of being independently wealthy, is you can say, well, I don't care if there's not a market for it. I'm gonna do it anyway. But I'm not in a position where I can do that. I'm dependently wealthy, by which I mean not. So it is something that I think would be a lot of fun to do, but it's not on the horizon right now. But sometime down the road, who knows?
Now, there's another book that you did not too long ago, and that was, I believe, out through First Second, correct? And it was Maker's Comics, How to Fix a Car. And you essentially teach people through your illustrations how to fix their vehicle. Is that correct?
Well, to a degree, the more common stuff. So the things that are, I feel like for me at least, in order to fix something, I need to understand how it works. So it's partially an explaining the different mechanical processes that work within a car. How the oil works, why it works the way that it does, how the transmission works, why it works the way that it does. And by knowing that, it makes it easier to understand how maintenance and repairs come into play. So it's sort of a mix of those two things, sort of a how your car works and how to keep it working. And so that was a lot of fun to do. It gave me a chance to sort of put into practice some ideas about how comics work as educational tools, especially as they work for step-by-step things, and try and marry that with a narrative. Because I feel like, it's one thing to, create a diagram. It's another thing to create a diagram that also is a captivating story if you are not necessarily interested in what that diagram is teaching, but you do want to consume it and move on to the next thing. And so that one was really sort of as much a formal challenge as anything else, like just trying to balance those two components. And I had a lot of fun doing it.
And I can't imagine how popular that book should be right now, because, with everybody being in a pandemic and the world, being kind of topsy-turvy, people are probably really gravitating towards those how to fix it books, or how to do it themselves, the DIYs. And so, to be able to have something that people who love comics and graphic novels can read and look at and understand in their own visual way.
Well, that's my hope. It's hard without being able to go to conventions and things like that. I have no real interaction with thing. I've gotten a few emails, and then I have to gauge any interest in books by how many people that I that are more often than not that know my wife, that bring by a copy and leave it on the porch to be signed for their kid for a birthday or something. And so by that metric, it's doing all right. But that's I feel like that's a very skewed perspective on how things work. But I hope that people are able to find some use of it. I know that a lot of libraries carry it, and that makes me really happy.
And going to conventions here. Last time I saw you, we were at New York Comic Con, and you were killing it at your booth. Just so much diversity of products that you were providing there. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those products. But I guess this is a good moment to kind of sidestep and discuss quickly just how do you feel about the state of the comic book community right now? With the lack of the convention, are you seeing the community still rally together? Are you still seeing a lot of interest and focus on your work despite having to be very remote right now?
I hope so. I don't know that there's necessarily the degree of steady growth when it comes to and I guess that's something that you probably measure by social media followers or things along those lines. I feel like that can potentially be it's certainly not the only metric, but it is a quantifiable metric in a way that a lot of other things aren't. On the publishing side of things, I don't really see my publisher stuff except for royalty statements every once in a while. So it's very difficult for me to gauge whether or not anything is successful on that front until I hear that they're going to a second printing, or that I hear, oh, well, this book sold no copies, which luckily thus far I haven't heard for any of the recent stuff. So that's good. But that's a way of gauging stuff. It's been, I know it's been hard for a number of my friends, especially the ones that do a lot of conventions, and that's a big part of their income. We rely on convention income, but it's a relatively small percentage of our what we bring in for the household compared to what I think a lot of people who work in comics do. And so, I do maybe 5 conventions a year. And my best friend, Kyle Starks, who lives about an hour north of me, he does, he has done as many as 30, 40 conventions in a year. So if you're looking at even on, the low end of bringing in, $500 or $1,000 or something like that, if you are, an established, doing well cartoonist, that is a huge drop in what you can expect financially. So I know that a lot of people have been hurting a lot on that end. So far as community stuff goes, I think everybody tends to, reach out to each other and check on how they're doing. But beyond that, I think a lot more folks are doing kind of what we're doing now, which are interviews and things along those lines. Just sort of, if more, as much as anything else, a means of staying in touch with people that you would usually see in person at least a couple of times a year.
And I think that's something that both artists and musicians are kind of struggling with at the same time, because we're going to have, our next guest is going to be a working musician, and I know that without the ability of really going to shows or having venues or concerts or anything there, it's really hard for them as well. So,
hands down, yeah.
See something on the horizon. So,
I feel like musicians have a much worse time right now than cartoonists. And also, anybody who works in live performance. I've got friends who do theater that have had to move from this. Somewhere we're living in New York, and their Broadway gigs closed up. And what can they do? They can't stay there because there's no income coming in, and there's not enough external support to keep anybody afloat. So it's a lot situation for all.
Now, going back more to mainstream comic stuff, let's take a look at, you've done work recently for Mars Attacks. You did a graphic novel, Dynamite, with them. What is it like working with licensed material? I mean, when you're no longer involved in historical fiction, what are you doing when it comes to, working with, known franchises?
That that can be fun. I tend to do it pretty infrequently for a couple of reasons. One, I you know, I only get asked so many times, so like I tend to do franchise stuff less in comics and more in other arenas. So like posters, board games, trading cards, like things like that. Like that tends to be where most of my franchise stuff comes in.
I love
Um,
your posters. When you do like
thank
the
you
Indiana
very, very
Jones
much.
one or the Supernatural one, those are great.
Thank you. The Mars Attacks one came about simply because Kyle, who I mentioned before, got asked if he would be interested in writing it, and uh, the the folks at the publisher said is there anybody that you would like to draw it? And he's like, let me see if Chris wants to draw it. He might be good at it. And so he reached out and said, hey Chris, do you want to draw Mars Attacks? And I said, I wasn't really. And he's like, I'm writing it, and I said, sure. So we decided to do that one together, and it was a whole lot of fun. Like they gave us a great deal of creative control over the property. The license holder was wonderful, and real amenable to all our ideas and approaches to things. And it was a both a fun project and a really fast project. Like I drew and colored everything. And the first issue, I think I had to do in about 10 days because I was on top of another project just coming off of that. But I really wanted to do this, and they wanted it out by Halloween. So that's contrasted with the book I'm doing now, which I'm taking forever on. So it's a balance.
And yeah, going to the license kind of work, I love that even though you're taking your own spin on it and you're definitely doing your own style, it just really shows through, the real love that we have for these kind of characters and these designs and the worlds that they create. Do you feel like this is a chance for your, like, I mean, obviously you were a child of the 80s and 90s too. And reliving these kind of visuals, is it almost kind of like, getting a chance to, you know, share your own spin on it, or is it more kind of a feel for you to be able to say like becoming a part of these worlds in a way?
Yeah, there's a mix of it. A lot of times for posters, and this isn't always the case. Like if I get asked to do a poster and there's already a really good poster for it, like sometimes I'll still do it. But a lot of the posters that I've done because I really like the movie, but I don't necessarily like the poster, and so it's my attempt to try and make something which execution wise, I'm rarely going to be happy with it, or at least I'm rarely going to be happy with it, within a couple of years. But design and composition wise, I'm usually happy with, and so it's a chance to sort of do that sort of thing. But with some of them, it's really exciting to get to do stuff. Especially if you're working with a client who does something neat. So like I did a really big, like they did a great job. It's like a 17 pass silk screen for Disney Fine Arts with Cyclops print work of Hunchback of Notre Dame, and that was really a lot of fun because one. It's got a lot of flaws, but that's still my favorite Disney movie. And so it was, and nobody had done a Hunchback thing at that point for them. They were like, "Do you want to do anything?" I was like, "Hunchback," and they're like, "Really?" And I was like, "Yeah." Um, so it's fun for the. Yeah, it's fun getting to do something sometimes that's a part of things. Sometimes it's just fun to do it because I really like the characters, or I really like the movie, or something along those lines, and it's a chance to share that affection, visually with other people.
And speaking of sharing stuff with other people, I love that you do little, personalized cards. You have a Patreon that I know you're super active with. And, like, is there ever a character that you have to illustrate where you kind of eye roll, or you're like, oh man, this is the 20th time I've done this character? Or every time you do it, do you discover a little bit like new techniques, new styles, new ideas? And how is the approach to, essentially making other people's childhood fantasies and characters come alive?
Well, sometimes it's really easy because by and large, a lot of the folks who uh, follow me on Patreon, many of them are longtime followers, and as a result of that, a lot of them started following me, on social media or reading my books or things like that because of a shared affinity for the subject matter that I was drawing. And so, people would read my books because they're historical, or people would look at my art because I do these literary characters or historical figures or things like that. So a surprisingly high percentage of my commission things tend to be things that I would probably be drawing anyway. And so that makes things easier. It also makes it to where I can sort of double dip and use those either as the springboards for other projects and say, well, I just did this, this picture of Julius Caesar that I liked. I'm also going to do a Mark Antony and and a Brutus and a Cicero and some other things. And so one commission may lead to me doing some other project with that includes the art for that commission. When it comes to other people's stuff, usually it's characters that I'm familiar with. Sometimes it's stuff that I have, very little interest in. That doesn't mean that I'm going to do any less of my best in terms of trying to do the art. Sometimes it's stuff that I didn't know, and in trying to learn about it in order to do my best drawing of it, it becomes something that I become very interested in. I may see a movie that I otherwise would have missed, or I may, read about a historical period that I wasn't familiar with. I got one person did a string of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia characters for one. And I was like, well, I guess I need to finally sit down and watch it. And I've been really enjoying it. And I wouldn't have sat down and watched it probably had it not been for knowing that this commission was on the table. And, sometimes I can just do image searches and things like that. But usually I feel like the more familiar I am with what I'm drawing, the better I'm going to be able to get across the character of the people that I'm depicting.
And Chris, I know that you were a professor at SCAD in sequential art a few years back, but really, when I hear you talk, you are such a historian. You're a historical professor in so many ways. I feel like I could sit and listen to a lecture of yours at, say, Yale or Harvard, and the level of material, like meticulous detail that you put into these characters and these designs, and you admit that maybe it's stuff you're not familiar with, but that you have to learn. Like, where do you go to for these resources? I mean, you obviously go beyond just Wikipedia, but where do you really find the bulk of what gives you I guess to say the artistic licensing to develop these uniquely your own way? I mean, where do you really find this information?
It really, it varies from project to project. Usually, if it's something with which I'm not already pretty familiar, I will start with something as general as possible. If there is hopefully, for lack of a better word, a pop historical book about it, then I will start with that. And then from there, once I have a better sense as to sort of the general overall of it, I will go in and start looking at specific details of things. And so I will, like I say, usually start there, depending on what it is and depending on what I'm looking for. Sometimes I will read first person primary sources. So like this, what do you call it? These Women Warrior series that I did. Like the Dahomey Amazons, I couldn't find anything about their clothing. And so I kept looking through, and I was able to find that an expedition that had gone there and watched a parade of them. And so luckily one of the people was describing them. But, I had to read, and when I say read, I was skimming looking for this. But, 3 or 4 books about, travels to that section of Africa from the, like the 1870s. To get a sense of things. And then all of a sudden it's like they wore blue and they carried umbrellas and they did this. And I was like, yes, I got my stuff. And they had names, like they were like, here's such and such. They were 2 of the people. And I was like, haha. So it's, it's a mix of things. I'll go to museums, I'll talk to different people. It depends on the scope of the project. If it's a book, I want to immerse myself as fully in it as possible so that I don't have to do so that I have to do the minimal amount of research as I go. If I know the subject as inside and out as I feel like is necessary, then I'll be able to just sit down and do the book. And there's something very easy and helpful about that versus having to stop along the way and check things as I go, because sometimes you'll have a fact that's inerrant from the beginning and you'll have based something around something that couldn't have happened, and that can be very frustrating. If it is
stories too, because I mean, it takes people out of the storytelling.
Yeah, if they're familiar with
it, realize it ruins the whole story for them. So,
yeah.
For example, I read a graphic novel of Treasure Island, and I'll leave the publisher out of this conversation. But let's just say that one of the pirates was wearing essentially what looked like a three-piece business suit, because I don't think they did any real research. I think that, I mean, it literally looked like he had a vest with a tie and a suit and pants, and it almost looked a little zoot suit kind of like style. But it was enough, even if it was just maybe the way my brain interpreted it,
Yeah.
it was enough for me to go, now I lose interest in the story. And the writing can be great, but if the art doesn't emulate what your expectations are, it can really ruin it. Artist, so.
And I can be flexible when it comes to art direction stuff. It a lot of it depends on whether or not it is a conscious, if it feels like a conscious design choice or a misunderstanding of the period. There's plenty of stuff that is woefully historically accurate, but like I can watch the first few seasons of Vikings despite, all their mohawks and, the leather armor and things along those lines, and enjoy it. Whereas, there are like that same general aesthetic when applied to that Three Musketeers show, like I couldn't get past, mostly because in Vikings it serviced the character, and in Musketeers I felt like it did the exact opposite. Like it unified the characters in such a way by giving them almost identical costumes that it sort of robbed them of personality. So it's, it depends on what it is as to whether or not that in particular pulls me out. Like 9 times out of 10, I would rather watch a Western with fantasy Western trappings versus, the rigid Victoriana of the actual dress. So I think there's a balance to be made with it. But when it comes to projects like, if I'm doing single illustrations, if I'm doing commissions, if I'm doing stuff like that, I tend to look I try to stop my research at what I need in order to successfully complete that piece. And once I have that much, I stop. That can take a lot of different places in order to find. But I have a tendency to sort of rabbit hole myself, and I don't have the time to do that. I have a lot of projects that I want to do, and so I try to limit the amount of just for the heck of it research to just for the heck of it reading time, and not make it a part of what is ostensibly work.
Have you ever had an experience of kickback from a reader who is, maybe a historical professor themselves? Like, Chris, you illustrated that in a way that wouldn't necessarily work for the times. I mean, have you ever had that experience with your readers?
Only once, and it was Sergio Aragones was like, "Your rigging is wrong on the fore mainstay," and I was like, "Well, whoops."
How many sailors are really going to read the book, right?
Yeah. So that was my only time.
I had an experience recently where I just I was doing the layout illustrations for Tom Petty's father's maintenance vehicle. He had a van that he would drive around to sell his dry goods in, and I thought I found the van based off of one photograph that had the van parking in the driveway, and one of Tom Petty's friends in his childhood was like, that's not the van. You didn't get the right van for that. So it's one of those things where it's like, damn it. But fortunately,
you're specifically giving your books to folks who are intimately familiar with the things. Like I'm actively not reaching out to, well, I did reach out to my favorite Roanoke historian, Karen Kupferman, because they wanted to have an expert reader slash somebody to do the forward, and they were like, who would be good for it? And I said, I think Dr. Kupferman would be good. And Dave was like, is she related to Michael? And I was like, I don't know. And I looked on Wikipedia and I was like, yes, it's his mom. And so, luck of the draw, her son's a cartoonist. And so the editors of the place were able to reach out to him. He was able to reach out to her, and she took it on and did that, and found a few things that I wasn't, that I had either gotten wrong or misrepresented. And so I was able to fix those up before putting that book out, which was nice.
Now, I want to go back quickly. You mentioned rigging, and I do recall that a few years back, you spent time on a fishing trawler of some sorts, right? And you were on there doing some, I think, a harrowing experience of your own. But besides that, you literally went on a fishing boat to learn essentially how to draw and rig and do all that kind of stuff.
Well, I think the one you're thinking, I have done fishing boats, but the one you're thinking of probably is I crewed on a historic tall ship, actually. Out of the Pacific Northwest. So my friend Lucy Bellwood, who's a cartoonist, hooked me up with the folks who were up in that neck of the woods. She's a big tall ship sailor. She ran away. I mean, I think she had her parents' permission, but she left home at 16 to sail for 3 years. And so she hooked me up with the Lady Washington, and I went and did that. I was there for 2 weeks on the boat and then some surrounding time. So it was the longest I'd been away from my kid at that point. And since then, I've crewed on a couple of other ships as well. And so, so it's, it was a great experience. And at first, I spent the first like 3 or 4 days walking around sketching everything. And by the end, I realized I didn't really need to sketch anything, because at that point, I knew where everything was and what everything was called and what everything did. And so if I have to sit down and draw a boat out of my head, I can draw it and draw it right. And at least, 18th or 19th century sailing ship, I can do that. And so that was a really worthwhile experience for that particular purpose. And so if I do any more boat stories, then I'm sitting pretty on that.
And do you think that level of research, because that's almost like living research right there, is something that you just really feel passionate about? I mean, when you do your research, do you dive, no pun intended, full force into it? I mean, to really experience what the people of the characters and what the world would experience at the time?
I do. Now, I think it's important to make a distinction between the fact that this is helpful research, which it is, and also recognize that this is something that I would want to do whether I was making a book about it or not. And so if I'm, building a rope bridge or working on a log cabin or crewing on a sailing ship or, whatever it might be, those are things that I want to do. And so I can use the research angle to justify my taking the time to do them. Now, does that mean that they don't absolutely help in terms of the execution of the book? They absolutely do, but I by no means think that it's a necessity for folks to do that in order to be able to create their best work. Some of my very favorite writers, never leave their desk. I do think that that does require a very perceptive person, a very imaginative person, a person who recognizes things at a level much higher than I can. Like, it's much easier for me to recognize how a character is going to act if I have done something similar to what that character has done. And so it's great for someone like me who that sometimes can have a myopic view of both what people are like and what experiences are like by expanding that experience base.
Now, just to finish up, I want to talk a little bit about your essentially your stand-ups you've been doing. You've had this hobby, you call it. I watched your video the other day. You were talking about how this is kind of a hobby, but you have been doing for a little while now these cardboard and wooden cutouts of historical figures, play sets, figurine sets. And you're working on one about Santa's play shop right now, Santa's workshop.
Yeah, so these I did back in 2017, I think, the ones that are up on the screen. And this was my first sort of foray into making Santa things. So this was a set of 10 variations on St. Nicholas. And I really like that. And that along with the Appalachian Folk Monster set that I did have been probably my most consistent bestsellers at conventions. Just because, people really like Christmas stuff and they make good gifts and they make good decorations. And so I've been doing a lot of woodcraft and making little wooden figures and things along those lines. So I started with that big pirate port, and that was kind of, for lack of a better word, my troubleshooting project. Like I did it knowing that I would make a lot of mistakes in terms of especially how the making of it would go. And so it was designed as a learning process that I could also hopefully make something that was nice and that could be shared. And so I did that with the pirate port, and I'm very happy with how it turned out, but it cost dramatically more to make, and took a lot more time to make than I would have preferred, because then that makes it to where it becomes, very expensive for folks who want to get it. And I really like to keep my prices as low as possible in order to make it to where folks with limited means don't have an issue with being able to pick it up, because I have been frequently of limited means, and I always appreciated a good bargain. So I've gone through.
Really good bargain, because this is hanging up right next to me as we're talking, and this pirate play set is the crown jewel of my office. I am
so glad, Andre. Thank you so very much.
If any of you are looking for a great gift, this pirate play set is wonderful. I mean, Chris has created all of these golden age pirates, and they're set up. And the fact that you do it, really for so many people at such an affordable rate, this is worth more than its weight in gold, and just really a lot of fun.
Well, thank you so very much. So I've been slowly going through and figuring out different ways of doing things, different ways of cutting it, ways of making it to where it can be shipped partially assembled, so that the boxes don't have to be 3 feet long. And then there are only like 3 things that a person has to do to put it all together. So, I'm constantly experimenting and fiddling around with it. But yeah, for the Christmas thing, my dad passed away last year, and he was the person with whom I was first talking about this, because he was with me when I first met the person who does the image transfer on a lot of these wood things. And so we were talking about, different things. And he was like, your bread and butter is going to be Christmas. Like, if you do Christmas stuff, Christmas ornaments, like that's, a perpetual market that's there. And I was like, sure. But, what people really want is the Second Seminole War, but I think he was definitely right. And so, although I didn't have anything to come out this year, I've been working on a big set of what'll be sort of a Santa's workshop thing. And I'm going to have those in 3 different sizes, so that people can get stuff according to the space that they have, according to their budget, things along those lines. So there's one that's about 3 feet tall by about 16 inches. And then there's another one that's a bit bigger than that, and then there's another one that's a lot bigger than that. So the biggest one is
I want the really, really big one.
Well, here I'll show you. It's hanging right here, but it's the.
And this is a great holiday gift, everyone. I mean, I think you said you were going to start making the sales potentially ready for the summer.
That's the plan. So right now there are a lot of figures on it, so they may fall off when I turn it around. But whoops, it's
bigger than you.
Yeah, it's big. It's about 5 feet by 2.5 feet, something like that. So, but it's got these little figures that go on it that are wooden and freestanding. So here's like Chris Kindle, which is a gift giver in Austria and things like that. You've got the Krampus, you've got Santa Claus, all the big hits, and a lot of not so big hits that folks don't know. So,
educate children on things that they don't know beyond Santa Claus, and that's the thing. It's an excellent way to educate and entertain at the same time.
Well, thank you so much. What I wanted to do with it was kind of create a sort of secularized nativity. I plan to do a nativity as well, but I think that I really like Santa stuff. And my dad used to make these creche scenes, and so my mom has one in her house. And we had it growing up, and it would be you'd have all these little plastic or plasticine Fontanini figures that you'd move around, and there were tons of them, and you'd make up stories for them and have adventures for them and things like that. And I don't feel like Santa villages lend themselves as much to that. The figures are kind of small, and most of them are sort of regular people. You have Santa, and then you have guy getting a Christmas tree. And I really wanted to make something that's like, well, this is the world of Santa, this encompassing fantasy world. And so I've been working with my friend Benito Serino, who's a fellow Kentuckian, to kind of create, and he's a Christmas expert, is the reason that I reach out to him, as well as a really wonderful writer. And so we've been sort of coming up with ways to unify all of these figures into sort of a single narrative universe, where sometimes they don't necessarily overlap. A lot of times they do, but it makes it to where you can come up with ways for what is this person's relationship with Santa. And that's been a lot of fun kind of figuring out, because some of the things aren't as clear as others. And so in some places I get to, make up more things than others. And I always love getting to make stuff up. So that's always fun.
And, to finish off with us, I just want to share with everyone, Chris's latest book, The Roanoke Colony, American's First Mystery, just came out, I think, not more than 2 or 3 months ago through First Second, which they're doing a whole series of kind of historical graphic novels now. And I think your book was either the first or the second one that they did, right? They just put out one with the Challenger, I think, or they put out one with the astronauts, but this one came out before. What I really loved, it was a book for kids, sure, absolutely meant for tweens and maybe younger kids. But what I really loved is you didn't dumb it down. There was no making it easy for the kids for kids' sake. You kind of trusted in the fact that children and adults could read this and gain and glean something from it. Was that purposeful, or is this something in your own personal way of educating and writing that you always go for?
Yeah, I don't think that I was particularly difficult in terms of syntax or complexity of sentence structure or anything like that, which is something that I would do with the Krogan books, which I wrestle with and this is something I'm always wrestling with: reader accessibility versus period flavor. But with Roanoke, the main thing is that a lot of the ideas that I had to go through are pretty complex. But in terms of what the economics of this situation are, like how the relationship between these two countries affected this thing, and how that affected insurance rates, and how that affected whatever else. And so no part of history is independent of the stuff that precedes it or follows it, and no part of history is not influenced by everything else that's going on around it. There are all these external factors that play into every decision that these people make. And so with Roanoke, that was something that I felt, at least on the kids' book side of things, which is the only thing that I'd read, when I was a kid, really did not go into the complexities of the situation. How you've got 8 or 9 different governments, and if you've got First Nation people, you've got English, you've got Portuguese, you've got the Spanish, you've got just tons of these different things happening for specific reasons at a specific time that leads more or less to the inevitable failure of this colony. And most of the books that I read, were like, oh, kind of spooky, what happened? And I think that a lot can be learned about how there are all these external factors that affect everything. And so that was what I was really excited to kind of get across to kids. And I feel like, if you present it in a way that you're explaining it simply as possible, and you are explaining it as thoroughly as possible, and in an order that makes sense, that's the toughest part, is figuring out what order to explain things. Because everything is holistic, and it all does come into play, both with the car book and with this. That was the hardest thing, and for the exact same reasons. And it's something that I like as a challenge, and it's something that I hope that I am reasonably good at, because it's I put a lot of effort into trying to make sure that you don't have to know this thing in order to first understand this thing. And almost every car maintenance book that I've read, kind of, you've got to know how like 6 different things work in order to understand any one of them. And that's really hard. And history can be the same way.
And what I loved about the Roanoke colony is, like, you were playing with so many different cultures and different, people from all over the world. But you were very much respectful for them. You very much treated it and very respectful. You were acting as the voice for people who have been, dead for 200-300 years, but at the same time, people who are culturally specific to certain areas, and you didn't really stereotype it, which is a phenomenal, I think that's a gift, really, in storytelling.
Well, thank you very much. I tried not to. Some of the people I were not very forgiving to. Like, there were a few administrators that I was like, this guy was.
Well, we don't care for administrators. We can.
Yeah.
But anyway, this book is out now, The Roanoke Colony. It's a great graphic novel. First Second always puts out some superb stuff, and Chris's work is no exception. It is phenomenal. It's a great read. You can get it at any bookstore right now. Definitely recommend picking it up. And Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Andre, for having me on. I really appreciate it. Thank you for anybody who watched. I appreciate your having done so, and I wish you the very best of luck with the book and with the Dreamville show and everything else. I can't wait to read it. I'm excited about it. I've enjoyed all of your previous books that I've read, and I look forward to this one as well.
And I have to say, for everybody in the audience, we are already past the layout stage of the Welcome to Dreamville book. This is all the pages that I now have to go back and illustrate a little bit more detailed wise. But the layouts are done. We're good to go. And it looks like it's going to be hopefully smooth sailings from here on out. So if we have the right rigging, that is. So. All right, everyone. Well, happy holidays. Take care. Have a wonderful new year. We will be back in January with Isaac Smith, who's going to be hopefully serenading us with a little bit of his own rock music. But until then, stay groovy. Take care.